The Intel 270K Plus did something I really wasn't expecting. After tuning with fast memory, it actually managed to edge out the 7800X3D in some of my Tarkov testing. But before Intel fans start celebrating, there's a pretty big catch. At stock, it's not even close. And to get it to that point, you need a higher end motherboard, fast DDR5, which is super expensive right now, as most of you know, more knowledge about tuning, you need to use more power, and you're buying into the LGA 1851 platform, which really doesn't have much of an upgrade path. Meanwhile, the 7800X3D is a little more expensive for the CPU itself, but honestly, if you look around online right now, they're probably around the same price. Anyways, it works great on cheaper AM5 boards. You can use an entry-level board versus a high-end board and it won't make a difference. It doesn't care nearly as much about RAM speed, and the full platform can actually cost a lot less. So why compare the 270K Plus to the 7800X3D in the first place? At first, the 270K Plus looks pretty tempting. It's $300 MSRP, but really they're going for around $350 right now. The gaming performance looks pretty good, and if you edit, stream, or do productivity work, it has a real argument. In this test, I'm looking at Tarkov performance only, okay? And the 7800X3D has held a high spot for a reason. It's pretty hard to beat. You don't need a crazy motherboard, expensive RAM, or hours of tuning to get it to peak performance. Pretty much out of the box, it's going to be very close to it. The 270K Plus, on the other hand, needs a bit more help to show what it can really do. You probably want to get a Z890 board. You probably want fast DDR5. You're going to want to know how to tune it, and you're going to need a little more power and cooling to get it there. And on top of that is a platform without an upgrade path from. So yeah, the CPU price looks pretty good, but once you build the whole system around it, the value gets very difficult to defend. For the testing configurations, I'm keeping both systems as close as I realistically can. Same GPU, same cooler, same storage, same settings, same root, and 3 runs per Resolute. The 7800X3D is running on an ASRock X870E Nova. The Core Ultra 270K Plus is on a Gigabyte Z890 Eagle and an Orico 07000 Gen 4 M2 for storage. Handling graphics for both systems is a Zotac 5090 Solid. For RAM, I tested the 270K Plus two ways. 6000 CL30 and 8000 CL38. The 6000 setup is closer to what most people would realistically buy. The 8000 setup is where the chip starts to wake up, but for that extra speed it costs twice as much. So in reality, I could have went with 64 gigs on the 7800X3D, but I decided to keep it 32 versus 32 for this comparison. For tuning, I use the XTU Auto Tune on the 270K Plus. The 7800X3D is running a -20 undervolt. The F clock is running at 2133, and the U clock and M clock are synced at 1:1. SMT is disabled. Test map is Streets of Tarkov. I use the heaviest root in the game to hammer the CPU, and that path goes from Klimov to Lexos. I'm using my Pure 70 preset, which is my optimized high texture graphics presets. I tested in 1080, 1440, and 4K with 3 runs at each resolution in both offline and online raids. Offline gives us a baseline, online shows more of the real raid behavior. Starting with the offline results, at 1080, the 7800X3D had the highest average FPS at 112. The 270K Plus with 8000 memory was right behind at 110, and the 6000 dropped to 101. The surprising thing to me was the 270K Plus at 8000 had better lows here than the 7800X3D, with a 90 and 79 for the 1 and 0.1% lows, compared to 86 and 75 on the 7800X3D. So the average FPS was behind by 1, but the lows were much better, and that means it was smoother on the Intel. So the Intel with fast memory wins by a little here. In 1440, the 270K Plus at 8000 averaged 109. The 7800X3D averaged 108, and the 6000 setup averaged 100. And this pattern held throughout all the testing. It's basically a tie between the Intel at 8000 and the 7800X3D. And for me, I was really surprised that the Intel actually had better lows. At 4K, the 270K Plus at 8000 and 7800X3D both averaged 109. 270K Plus had slightly better lows, but the actual gap is pretty small. At 1080 online, the 270K Plus at 8000 averaged 103, while the 7800X3D averaged 101. The 6000 setup averaged 95. Again, the 270K Plus had slightly better lows as well. Marginal numbers, but they were leads. At 1440 online, the 270K Plus at 8000 averaged 101, while the 7800X3D averaged 100. The 6000 setup averaged 95. Again, basically a tie between the Intel at 8000 and the 7800X3D. At 4K online, the 270K Plus averaged 101, 7800X3D averaged 99, the 6000 setup averaged 93. In this test, the 1% low favored the 270K Plus, but the 7800X3D actually had the better 0.1% lows. But basically, you can see the pattern here has been the same story throughout each result. The 270K Plus with 8000 memory is competitive and even edges ahead, while the 6000 setup is consistently behind the 7800X3D. Temps were fine on both. The 7800X3D sat around 60 degrees. The 270K Plus was around 60 with the 6000 kit and was around 64 or 65 with the 8000 kit. In terms of cooling, they're pretty even. Power draw is where the 7800X3D separates itself. The 7800X3D pulled an average of about 59 watts during testing. The 270K Plus pulled around 84 watts with the 6000 kit and around 99 watts with the 8000 kit. So to get the 270K Plus performing at its best, you're pulling roughly 70% more power than the 7800X3D. For a low single-digit performance lead, that's a lot. And that's kind of how I look at tuning in general. I'm not trying to do extreme overclocking or push things to the limit. Most people are not going to want to do that. And honestly, there's not that much benefit these days to that type of overclocking. And it's more about bragging rights and people who do it kind of as a sport almost. So yeah, most people just want a setup they can copy, run every day, that's stable, and just know they're getting the most out of the system without turning it into a science project. And that's what I try to do with my tuning guides too, kind of make it like a recipe. You just follow these steps and use these normal daily settings, and this is what you can expect to get out of it. So I'll give Intel credit here. The 270K Plus is definitely a solid effort. But for Tarkov, it still feels like a little too much work, too much power, too much platform cost to barely beat something that's frankly easier and cheaper. So here's my advice to anyone looking to upgrade or buy right now and is considering these two chips. If you already have an AM5 board, the 7800X3D is basically a no-brainer drop-in upgrade. You don't need a new motherboard, you don't need new RAM, and depending on what CPU you're coming from, you can probably sell your old chip and make the upgrade even cheaper. For a new build, the platform cost is where Intel gets really difficult to justify. The 7800X3D can be found for around $350 to $400 right now online. You can get a decent B650 or B850 board for around $100, and a 32GB kit of DDR5 6000 CL30 is probably around $350, $400. So let's say the platform's around $850, right? That gives you very good Tarkov performance, low power draw, and you can tune it a little more, but it's basically running very close to its max out of the box. The 270K Plus looks similar if you only look at the CPU price. But if you want it to perform at its best, you're not really building a cheap Intel setup anymore. With a Z890 board and 6000 speed DDR5, you're already spending more than the 7800X3D platform for worse performance. Throw in fast DDR5 at 8000 CL38, and you're closer to $1,300 to $1,400 just to reach or barely edge out the 7800X3D and Tarkov. And at that price, you're above even a 9850X3D. So for a Tarkov focus build, I don't think the 270K Plus makes much sense. If you also do professional editing, rendering, heavy multitasking, or productivity work on the same machine, then the Intel chip has more of an argument. But for the gamers out there, I'd say it's a good effort from Intel. It's just too much money and too much power to barely fight with something AMD already had sitting there that's cheaper and performs just as well. So yeah, my takeaway is pretty simple. The 270K Plus is better than I expected. For Intel, I'd call this a solid step forward. Gaming performance is pretty decent. Productivity performance is really good. And for mixed workloads, I can see why people are so interested in this chip. But for gaming, and especially for Tarkov, it doesn't really register. I'm impressed with it compared to where Intel has been recently. I'm not impressed compared to what AMD already has. And the bigger problem is that the 7800X3D is not even the whole AMD argument anymore. Chips like the 7600X3D exist, and it basically has the same gaming performance for an even lower cost. On top of that, The 9000 X3Ds like the 9800 and the 9850 are usually $100 to $150 more than a 7800 X3D. So here's where the 270K Plus ends up for me. It's good enough to show Intel has made some progress, but not good enough to change my recommendation. They're still pushing everything to capacity on inferior architecture rather than having better tech underneath, if that makes sense. And that's all I got for this one, guys. I hope it was helpful. If this video helped you make a decision on an upgrade or build, please consider using the affiliate links down below for those purchases. It really helps support the channel and helps me to continue bringing you comparisons like this. Thank you for all the amazing support you guys have shown this year. I can't believe we're almost at 100K and very close to receiving our first YouTube play button. Very exciting stuff. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.